Before the lions, there was an audit, a team of Persian officials, men who wanted Daniel gone, searched his accounts, his decisions, every choice he made, running a third of the empire, hunting for one mistake to use against him. They found nothing, no bribe, no missing shipment, no cut corner. Daniel. Chapter 6, verse 4 says it plainly. They could find no corruption in him because he was faithful, no negligence, nothing at all. Think about that. So what did they do when the audit failed? They didn't walk away. They found another door in, one that had nothing to do with his work and everything to do with his God. Over the next few minutes, you'll see exactly what they tried next, and exactly what made Daniel's daily conduct impossible to touch. So they changed their weapon. If the ledgers were clean, they would go after the man himself. And the way they did it is one of the oldest moves in any broken system, worth watching closely, because you may see a smaller version of it wherever you work. They didn't go back to his accounts, they went to the king. A delegation of satraps and administrators came to Darius with what looked like an honor. For 30 days they proposed, let no one in all the empire pray to any god or any man, except to the king himself. Anyone who broke it would be thrown into the den of lions. Darius, flattered, signed it into law, and under Persian custom, once the king's seal was on it, not even the king could take it back. Now look at what they had actually done. They didn't charge Daniel with theft. They didn't accuse him of a missed shipment, a bribe, a single cut corner, because there wasn't one. Instead, they engineered a law that made his faith illegal. They reached past his work, which they couldn't touch, and aimed at the one part of his life they could predict, the fact that Daniel prayed. And Daniel, chapter 6, tells us exactly what he did the moment he heard the decree was signed. He went home. He climbed to his upper room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem, and he knelt down 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, just as he had always done, not louder, not in protest, not in secret either. He didn't change a single thing. The trap was built for a man of routine, and the routine never flinched. Here is the part I don't want you to miss, and it lands right where you live. Think about your own workplace for a moment, the politics, the person who wants your seat. When someone decides to take another person down, the first place they look is the work, the numbers, the emails, the decisions. It's the easiest ground to fight on. You only abandon that ground when it gives you nothing. That is precisely what happened here. These men were not fools. They ran a third of an empire. They chose the hardest possible line of attack, writing a brand new law, manipulating a king, risking their own standing, for one reason. The easy attack had already failed. The audit came back empty. His work gave them nothing to hold. So sit with the strange logic of it. Their elaborate scheme is not a sign of Daniel's weakness. It is the loudest possible confession of his strength. You do not build a custom trap to catch a man you can catch with the ordinary rules. The very fact that they had to move the target from his desk to his knees, from what he did to what he believed, is the verdict on his work. It was clean. It was untouchable. They had checked, and they had lost. Which leaves the real question, the one the whole story is quietly circling. The men who audited Daniel weren't lazy. and they weren't gentle. They wanted him gone. So what, exactly, was in this man's ordinary working life, the daily, unremarkable conduct of a government official, that even his enemies, hunting on purpose, could not find one fault in? That's what we're going to open up next, because the answer isn't a personality trait. It's a practice, and it's one you can actually put your hands on. So let's open it up. What was in Daniel's ordinary workday that left his enemies with nothing? Go back to the exact wording of the report they couldn't file. Daniel chapter 6, verse 4 says, they could find no error or fault in him because he was faithful. Slow down on those two words because they're not the same accusation. Fault is corruption, the bribe, the kickback, the deal under the table. But error is something quieter. Error is negligence, the sloppy handoff, the number nobody double-checked. The task marked done, that wasn't. These men were hunting for both, and on both counts, the file came back blank. Now here's the mechanism, and it's the opposite of what most people assume. Daniel wasn't untouchable because he was brilliant or connected or lucky. He was untouchable because there were no gaps in his work, nothing left half done for someone to trip over, no loose thread for a hostile hand to pull. When men who wanted him destroyed went looking through months of decisions, every single one of them held up. That is not a personality. That is a practice. And it's a practice you can name because you already know where it lives. It lives in the work nobody is watching. Think about a normal Tuesday at your job. There's the work that gets seen, the presentation, the meeting, the report with your name on top. And then there's the other 90%, the email you could answer today or let sit till Thursday, the expense line you could log honestly or round up in your favor, the follow-up call you told someone you'd make, the corner you could quietly cut because realistically, no one would ever check. Every one of those tiny, invisible moments is a door, and Daniel's whole reputation was built on the fact that he kept closing them day after day when no one was watching, so that when someone finally did come looking, there was no door left open. That's the practice underneath the word faithful. It isn't a feeling. It's consistency in the unseen. It's treating the work no one will inspect exactly the way you'd treat the work that lands on the boss's desk. Same care, same honesty. No seam between the two, and I want to be careful here because this is where a lot of teaching goes wrong. I am not telling you that if you do this, you'll get the promotion, or the raise, or that the people scheming against you will suddenly lose. Look at the story. Being faultless didn't keep Daniel out of the lion's den. It didn't spare him the fight. What it did was something deeper and more durable. When the accusation finally came, it had nothing true to stand on. His conscience was clean, his record was clean, and a clean record can be attacked, but it cannot be convicted. That's the payoff, and it's a sober one. The man who closes his gaps doesn't buy himself an easy life. He buys himself something better, the ability to stand in the middle of an audit, an accusation, a bad season at the office, and know that whatever they find, they won't find a lie with his name on it. The peace of having nothing to hide is not a small thing. Ask anyone who's ever had something to hide. But this raises a harder question, and it's the one that separates a good week from a whole life. Anybody can be careful for a month. Anybody can keep the gaps closed when they know they're being evaluated. Daniel did this for decades in a foreign court under 3 different kings, surrounded by men who worshipped other gods and played by other rules. A practice like that doesn't come from willpower. It comes from somewhere deeper, earlier, and more decided. And that's where we're going next. Back to the very first day, to find the root this whole life grew from. To find the root, you have to go back about 60 years, to a frightened teenager, a long way from home. Before Daniel ran a third of an empire, he was a prisoner of one. Babylon had swallowed Jerusalem, and among the captives dragged back to the capital was a group of promising young men, Daniel among them, hand-picked for the king's own training program. It was, on paper, the opportunity of a lifetime. 3 years of the finest education in the world, a place at the king's table, food and wine straight from the royal kitchen, the same dishes the king himself ate, carried in on silver while the other captives went hungry. Picture the smell of it reaching a homesick, half-starved teenager who hadn't seen home in months. Everything a young man could want handed to him on a plate, as long as he became who Babylon wanted him to be. Most of the young men in that program took it, and no one would have blamed them. The plate was easy to say yes to. Saying no could cost you the king's favor. And in Babylon, the king's favor was the only thing standing between you and nothing. And this is where the whole story actually begins. Daniel chapter 1, verse 8, gives us the sentence that everything else grows out of. Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the king's food or the king's wine. Purposed in his heart. Resolved it. Settled it before the plate was ever set in front of him. Don't rush past that, because it's the root of the whole thing. Daniel did not decide in the moment. He didn't stand there with the food in front of him, hungry and afraid, and try to summon the willpower to say no. He had already decided. The line was drawn before he ever reached it. So when the pressure came, and it came from men who held his life in their hands, he wasn't making a choice. He was keeping one. That's the connection I don't want you to miss, because it reaches all the way forward to the clean record we talked about. The reason there were no gaps in Daniel's work 60 years later is that the man himself had no gap at the center. Decade after decade, king after king, the conduct held. Not because he white-knuckled every single decision, but because the deep decision had already been made. Once, and everything after, it was simply consistency. The daily faithfulness in chapter 6 is the harvest. The purposed heart in chapter 1 is the seed. And here's how that lands in an ordinary life. The reason most of us get caught off guard is that we try to decide who we are in the exact moment we're being tested. The expense report is already open. The chance to shade the truth is already in front of us, with a deadline breathing down our neck. And we try, right there, to be a person of integrity on the spot. It almost never works. Character decided in the moment bends to the pressure of the moment. But Daniel shows us the other way. You settle the line in the quiet, long before the pressure, so that when the test comes, there's nothing left to negotiate. You're not deciding, you're just keeping what you already decided. That's what made him faithful before Yahweh and faultless before men at the same time. They were never two different things. The private resolve and the public record were one seamless piece. He wasn't honest at his desk because he was being watched. He was honest at his desk because he'd already settled in his own heart who he was going to be back when he was nobody. A captive kid refusing a plate of food no one would have blamed him for eating. And notice, that first decision cost him. It didn't open doors, it risked the one door he'd been given. Which brings us, at last, back to the promise we started with. We've seen what they tried, we've seen the practice, and now the root beneath it. So let's put the whole thing together and answer the question the title asked plainly: why they could find no fault in this man, and what his daily life can hand you tomorrow morning. I want to give you something concrete to walk out with. Call it the Daniel 6 test. So here's the whole answer, laid out plain. Why could a room full of hostile investigators, men who wanted Daniel destroyed and had every resource to do it, find no fault in him? Not because he was perfect, not because he was untouchable in some magical way. They found no fault because there was no fault to find. And there was no fault to find because of how he lived on the ordinary days, not the day of the crisis, the 10,000 quiet days before it. That's the thing I most want you to carry out of this. Daniel's integrity wasn't an event, it was a standard. It didn't show up when the pressure came, it was already there, worn smooth by decades of repetition, so that when the audit finally landed, it found a life with no seam to pry open. The purposed heart of Chapter 1 became the closed gaps of Chapter 6. A single decision, kept 10,000 times, until keeping it was simply who he was. You cannot fake that under pressure. You can only build it in advance. And that's exactly what I want to hand you. Something concrete to carry into work tomorrow morning. Call it the Daniel 6 test, and its 3 plain steps. First, before the day starts, name your gap, not in general. Today, specifically. What is the one place in the next 8 hours where you'll be able to cut a corner and no one will ever check? The rounded up number, the call you promised. The task you could mark done, you already know what it is. Name it while it's still quiet. Second, settle it before you reach it. Don't wait to be strong in the moment. Daniel didn't. Decide now, in the calm, what you'll do when you get there, so that when the moment comes, there's nothing left to negotiate. You're not deciding under pressure, you're keeping something you already decided. Third, close the gap as if it were already being read. Do the invisible task the same way you'd do the one with your name on top and the boss looking over your shoulder. Same care, same honesty, no seam. That's the whole test. Name it, settle it, close it. Do that with one gap tomorrow and one the day after, and you're building the exact thing the investigators couldn't crack. Not a heroic moment, but a clean record, one ordinary day at a time. Now let me be honest with you about what this does and doesn't buy, because I won't sell you something the story never promised. Living this way will not guarantee you the promotion. It will not make the people scheming against you suddenly fail. Remember, Daniel still went to the lion's den. Being faultless didn't spare him the fight. It just meant that when the accusation finally came, it had nothing true to stand on. And that is worth more than it sounds, because the day someone comes looking, and in this life, someone eventually does, you will be able to stand there whatever they find and know they will not find a lie with your name on it. Your record clean, your conscience clean before Yahweh and before men. and those two never at war. That kind of peace can't be bought and can't be faked. It can only be built, one closed gap at a time. If this spoke to you, take a second and subscribe. There's fresh manna here every single day, and I'd love to keep walking with you. And if you made it all the way to the end of this one, I already know something true about you. You care about the unseen work. So tell me in the comments, what's the one gap you're going to close tomorrow? Naming it out loud is how it starts. Daniel didn't set out to be a hero. He set out, on one frightened day long ago, to simply not defile himself. And then he kept that promise until faithfulness was the only shape his life could hold. That's the invitation. Not a grand gesture, a daily one, Scripture explained. Faith applied, life changed. This was your daily manna. Come hungry tomorrow.